I want to welcome everyone to the next episode of Beyond the Culture, the place where we embrace change and challenge cultural norms and ideals. I'm your host, Dr. David Walker. And today, my guest is Dr. Kennette Thigpen. She is a psychologist, a licensed counselor and social worker. She's a speaker and a mental health strategist. And I'd like to welcome to the show, Dr. K. Welcome, Dr. K.
Hello, and Dr. David Walker, thank you for having me. And I just wanted to say kudos to you for having this platform where we can go beyond the culture.
Absolutely, and we're going to have a great show today. And I wanted you on today because I have realized that mental health is a major issue in our world today, in our climate today. And of course, I want to talk about a number of the issues that's going on in America and around the world. And so I want you to speak to those from a mental health profession. But before we get into that, I want my audience to know just a little bit about you. So if you don't mind, I always like to start off with trying to find out who is my guest. So I want to know who is Dr. K. My audience wants to know who's Dr. K. So just give us your backstory, you know, where you're from, where you were raised. You can talk about your education and anything else that you want to share about your background.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. So as Dr. Walker said, my name is Dr. Kennette Thigpen. I'm also known as Dr. K. So feel free to call me Dr. K. And I actually grew up on a military base. So shout out to all of my military brats, and also shout out to all of those that have served and are currently serving for us in the country. So I grew up on a military base with my parents and my older sister. And, you know, I think growing up on a military base, I think I quickly learned a lesson of change. You know, change is inevitable because although we didn't move a whole lot from state to state or city to city, I often saw my friends that would come and they would go, and I would go to school and things were constantly changing. And as we were doing community organizations, there was constant change. And so at a very young age, I learned that change is inevitable and change is constant. Of course, you know, being in a military family, you have my father who had a lot of structure. He was a person who wanted a lot of organization in the family. And so I always tell this story because it's hilarious to me. But my sister and I, we had what we had called junk drawers. You know, that junk drawers where you just kind of throw different stuff in there. And my dad would make us organize it. And so I was like, Dad, what is the purpose of a junk drawer if you're going to make us organize and clean it out? But, you know, that's just the structure that was in our household. And then my mother, who I love to pieces, she would be considered our disciplinarian. But, you know, I really, again, appreciate the lessons that they taught me because they, again, very quickly taught me discipline and structure. Now, my dad was the one who would do things like, if you're in trouble, stand 2 inches away from your bed and don't touch it. Or you make up your bed and you must be able to bounce that quarter off of it. Where my mom, honey, I got my hind parts tore up. But, but you know, I think, you know, those are all the things and lessons that made me into the woman I am today and why I'm so grateful for it. And so, of course, my journey goes on to, you know, we eventually moved back to North Carolina. So, of course, we were in Michigan when I was growing up. We moved to North Carolina, which is home for both of my parents, and they wanted to be closer to their parents as they got older. And, you know, I went to East Carolina University, where I actually majored in social work for undergrad and grad. But what's interesting about the story is, you know, people often want to know, like, how did you get into the field of psychology, or how did you get into the field? And it actually I started out in nursing. I started out in the nursing field. And when I was in high school, there was a program called Health Occupation Students of America. And that program was designed so that you could get college credit. And so while I was in high school, we had like our CNA certification where we were able to go and do rotations and work in nursing homes and, you know, occupational therapy labs and, you know, just different places to get the experience. And, you know, my grandma was super excited. She was like, oh, my grandbaby looks so great in that nursing uniform and the scrubs. And, you know, my mom was like, oh, my baby's going to be a nurse. And then when I started doing my rotations, I was like, I don't want to be a nurse anymore. And I think what was happening was I would pass out or get very nauseous at any type of bodily fluids. And nursing home is what did it for me. Now, I will say that it's a very humbling experience working in the nursing home, because you would get to see how many people did not have family members, and they didn't have the support, and they were just in there day in and day out. And some of them just were in their beds. And so it was a very humbling experience for me. And I just love people. And so the biggest thing I learned from that was just being that person to build rapport and build relationships with individuals. But I was like, you know what? Nursing is not for me, which I think is super important, because oftentimes as individuals, there are things in our life where we want to make a decision, we want to make that change, but because our grandmother said that we would be cute, or our mom thinks that's the career that we should be in, we continue forth in life and we never make the decision to make a pivot or to make a change. And so that was just another very valuable lesson for me, that, you know what, Kennette, you have the power and the decision to be able to make a change and be okay with whatever that is. And so, of course, you know, nursing is about helping people. And so I still want it to be in the field of, I know it sounds super cliche, but I want it to be able to help people. And I love studying people, and I love observing people. Like, I'm one of the people watchers. My fiance says, Kennette, you're just nosy. But whether it's nosy of observant, I just always love people. And so, you know, I went into the social work field, and I was able to help people. I started out in juvenile justice, being a court counselor for children that have felonies. Then I went to child protective services, where I did foster care, adoptions, child protective services. And then I decided to go back to school. And I was like, you know what, when I go back to school to get my PhD, I wanted to be able to do it in international psychology, because I love traveling. I love meeting people from around the world. And I wanted to know if there were differences globally of how people acted and what made them tick. And ultimately what I found out is that, you know, in the US, we're more of an individualistic culture, where it's all about me, you know, find what makes you unique and stand out in the world. Whereas globally, it's more about collectivism, and as a community, as a village, how do we make it work for each other? If that means I need to bring the pot of soup and 12 loaves of bread to feed everybody, or if I need to give you that hug and the kiss on the cheek, I'm going to do that. And so that's really the differences that I found out as far as moving into the psychology field. So it's really about me wanting to help people make an impact and make a difference.
Wow. That's awesome. So I like the way you said you started out in one field, nursing, but then it moved you over to the mental health, because you wanted to help people.
Yeah.
And that's a great, I guess it's, there's something really to be inspired about, because you really want to do something for other people. So that's really, really great. So now let me ask you about, the field of mental health, in terms of, you're an African-American woman, and how is it a challenge? Do we find a lot of African-American, in general, males and females, or is it tougher for women to get in the field? Is it a field that we as a people venture into, mental health?
Yeah, I think we're starting to see more and more of a change slowly, as far as, Black men and women getting into the field. I would definitely say there are more Black women in the field than there are Black men. Of course, we need our Black men there to be able to support our Black men. And, of course, there's all the stigmas that are related to mental health. And as far as, even people saying, you got to go to the altar, believe in the, trust in the Lord, and hold on to his unchanging hand, and everything's going to be all right. And, go talk to the pastor and get some anointing oil. Those are all the things we hear, even as a young, man, you're told, to be strong, you can't cry, don't talk about it, hide your feelings, all those things that kind of add to it. And it's interesting because a couple of weeks ago, one of my African-American health on Facebook, do you think I should go see a therapist? It was just a question he posted out to everyone. And he had over 300 comments of of course, everyone was like, yes, absolutely, please do. And I responded back and I was like, yes. I was like, even a psychologist needs a psychologist or a therapist, because I have mine too.
Right.
And, so he actually inboxed me and he was like, Kennette, I don't even know where to start.
Okay.
And so, I said, do you mind just can you give me a call really quick? And when he called me, my heart broke for him, because I was like, hey, how's it going? And he just kind of what I call like vomited on me, which is completely cool. But he just started from like his childhood, like when I was a child, and his dad treated him different and was super hard on him and didn't believe him. And then his fiance, died in a car crash, and he never got the help and support for that. And now he feels like his father is, being mean to his son that he's raising because the child is biracial. And
Okay.
the story just kind of went on and on. And then he said, in high school he used to, cut himself, and because that was a way to relieve pain. And I was like, oh my goodness. I was like, I need to get you some help and support. And so I was able to give him some free resources to be able to support him. And then, of course, one of his first questions, which kind of goes back to what you were saying, is this going to be an African-American male? Is this going to be an African-American woman? Who am I going to be talking to?
Mm-hmm.
And that part, I couldn't promise him. I could give him some resources. And the resource that was free, of course, you don't always get to choose who you're going to talk to. Of course, there's other resources out there like Psychology Today or different places where they have profiles where you're able to see the individual or do additional research on them. And so when it comes to African Americans or Black people being available to provide support in their communities, I can't say that that's always there. I think the accessibility period is an issue. And then you have the ones, if there are resources available, oftentimes it's someone that doesn't look like us.
Right.
So now you have an individual, a Black individual, going to talk to someone that doesn't look like them. And then you have all those cultural issues that they may not necessarily understand. And then they're providing support about something. And it's like, this doesn't even make sense.
Right.
Which then leads to either people being overdiagnosed
Mm-hmm.
or underdiagnosed. And then we don't get the right treatment that they need.
Would you say, have African Americans made it clear that they prefer someone of color to go and see as their doctors, that a mental health physician? Have they made it clear that that's what they choose? And would you say that some don't go because there's not as many African Americans in the field?
Yeah, I absolutely. I think both of those things. I think, well, one, when it comes to do individuals make it clear, I think it depends upon the resources that they have available to them. Because
Okay.
again, certain resources you can't call in and say, I want a Black male that I want to go talk to that lives in my 252, zip code or area code. Those are things that you can always search by. A lot of times they say you can search by like gender, do you want a male or female? But when it comes to race or religion, those are things that oftentimes you don't get the option to search for unless you're probably paying privately, or you maybe have the resources to be able to, go on a Psychology Today to say like, oh, okay, Dr. K is a Black female, I want to see her. Or Dr. Walker, he's a Black male, I can go see him. But when you don't have the equitable resources for everyone, they don't always have that luxury to be able to do that. And then so although they may want an African-American male or woman, they don't always get the chance to be able to do that because of the lack of resources that we have available to them.
I want to go back just a little bit to the part about the religion and the lack of seeking mental health because of, a relationship with God. I'm one, I'm a Christian, go to church. And as you said, we do find that there's such and I guess because of the biblical teachings, and we want to rely on Christ, we want to trust in God. But I think it's so important, as you were saying earlier, that you do go and get mental health with a counselor and not depend on God. And then you shouldn't feel that if you do go get mental health counseling, that it's not your abandonment of your faith somehow, that you're disappointing God if you go do that. So just talk about that just a little bit more.
Yes, it's so interesting because I'm in the middle of writing a book, and it's going to be called You Need a Bible and a Couch.
There you
need
go.
A Bible and a couch.
Wow.
And so I think, and I kind of stress that word "and" because oftentimes in life, in regards to anything, whether it's mental health or just decisions in life, we feel like we always have to do an or. So we're going to either have the Bible or the couch. And if you can really have both in the world, in life, you can have it all. You can have the ands. It doesn't have to be an or. Mm-hmm. And so, in the book, it really talks about mental health, bridging the gap of, mental health and being a Christian or your faith, because you can truly have all of them. Because the thing is, oftentimes we want to go seek pastoral counseling, and no shade to pastoral counseling, but they don't always necessarily have the skills to provide mental health counseling. And
Right.
I remember when I had my private practice several years ago, about 13 years ago, one question that I would typically get from people is, are you a Christian counselor?
Okay.
And my response would be, I'm a Christian and I'm a counselor, but I do
Okay.
not consider myself a Christian counselor, because oftentimes with Christian counselors, they want you to turn scripture to scripture. And as you're telling them something in regards to coping skills or diagnosing them, they want to see where it's at in the Bible.
Right.
That's not me. That's not my style. That's not what I'm here to do. And everything as far as diagnosing is not necessarily going to be in the Bible. And so
Hmm.
what I like to say is that, God puts people in places to be able to help and support you. You have to be able to be willing to support that. And so I'm hoping that once this book is finished, that it will give people a true understanding that, you can still believe in God. You can still be a Christian. You don't have to forego one or the other to get the support that you need. But mental health is real. When
Hmm.
I think about it, 1 in 5 people are experiencing either severe stress or mental illness.
Right.
And that's based upon what is being self-reported.
Okay.
So then it only leads me to believe, what about the people who are not even reporting it, who are not disclosing it, who are not saying anything, but they need the help? So in my book, this is Dr. K's thoughts. I really feel like those numbers are, is probably 1 in 2, if not 1 in 3, versus the 1 in 5, because again, that's based upon, what's being disclosed. And, that research is, maybe from 2017. But then when you kind of think about what's going on here right now in the moment, of course, with COVID, that's a whole nother conversation.
Right.
And then of course, with the murder of George Floyd and the racism and how that impacts mental health, those numbers are absolutely way more staggering.
Okay.
They have to be way more staggering than that.
Good. And I do want to come and talk a little bit about the George Floyd situation. But as far as the pastors are concerned, I know you're not a lawyer, but sometimes, and I'm a former pastor, so I have some experience with this, pastoral counseling should never be uh, mistaken for professional counseling. Am I right?
Yeah,
Could you talk
absolutely.
about that? Because that's important for pastors to know.
Absolutely. And so, when you're thinking about the mental health profession and what either licensed clinicians or psychologists or therapists or psychiatrists do, it's because there's been schooling, there's been certifications, there's been licensure that we have gone through in order
Hmm.
to diagnose someone or in order to treat someone. And they're completely two different things. And again, I'm not a pastor. I haven't been through any pastoral trainings. I don't want to speak to that.
Right.
But, the support that is provided by a pastor versus a professional counselor are two different things, and people need to understand what the difference is. Now, if you want to go to your pastor just to kind of to talk and to get prayer and to kind of understand the scripture and word, that's completely fine, and I encourage you to do that, because I know faith is super important to many people, including myself. So don't get it
Yes.
twisted. I might be going through an anxiety attack, but I'm going to pray about it. But if I
Sure.
need more professional treatment, I'm going to go seek out the professionals for that support, because again, we don't want someone providing support to someone that is not licensed to do so, because honestly, that could be more damaging to that individual than helpful. More damaging than helpful, for sure.
Absolutely. And I'm sure that potentially there could be some legal matters, because depending on what you say, depending on what someone does, if you're not licensed to give certain advice or certain counseling, if something by chance goes negative or the people perceive it as being negative, you could face a lawsuit, and that's something that you don't want to have.
Heck no, we don't want any lawsuits on our hands.
Yeah. So to the clergy, it's important that you differentiate between pastoral counselor and that you make sure that you get those who want professional counseling, that's where they go. So this way you don't have any legal issues. But you also
Exactly.
mentioned,
And
yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, and to that point, I've consulted with a few churches who have actually thought about putting mental health counselors within their church setting,
Okay.
or either contracting out with maybe people in their congregation who are maybe licensed professional to be able to provide either pro bono services within the church or low cost
Mm-hmm.
services within the church, because that's a way, as far as providing community support, that they're able to do. You know, the person that's holding the licensure is indeed the therapist or the counselor or the psychiatrist. So it's more so like a partnership
Mm-hmm.
that they're able to form together. So I have seen some individuals looking to do that or thoughts to do that. I've seen one or two who actually have implemented it. So again, that's something that's a little bit different, but I think people have their perception of having a therapist in a church that provides the contracted services feels a little bit different, because they feel that that is their safe place. That's their
Okay.
place of refuge,
Mm-hmm.
to be able to go and seek support, but then they're able to go see someone that's licensed and professionally able to do so.
You mentioned the George Floyd situation. And as of this interview, George has been memorialized, he's been funeralized. And just the other day, there was a hearing in Congress. His brother, I think his name is Philonis Floyd, was giving some comments about his brother's death, and it was asking for laws to be changed concerning police force and police abuse. So America is going through a challenging mental health crisis related to the George Floyd issue. I got a chance to hear you every Wednesday. You have this thing called Tip of the Week.
Oh, yes. Yes, yes, yes.
And I want you to relate the George Floyd scenario. Just talk about that a little bit first, and in relation to mental health. And then I want you to get to that tip of the week, because you called it vicarious trauma.
Yes.
And I would like you to kind of, because it sounds like it's related to the George Floyd situation. I'd like you to talk a little bit about that.
Yes. And so, you know, with the death of George Floyd, as many people viewed his death on television, his murder on television, you know, we watched as he took his last breath,
Mm-hmm.
you know, that 8 minutes and 46 seconds. And not only did we watch it, we rewatched it and we rewatched it.
Yes.
And as we scrolled through social media, we continue to see more of it. As we turned on the television channel, we begin to see more of it.
Mm-hmm.
And so not only did what we see on social media, the news outlets, that embeds into our heads and begins to also play a role into how we think about the situation, how we see and view the situation. And of course, that was a very traumatic event for any of us to have to watch and see.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you think about vicarious trauma is when somebody watches a traumatic event, a horrific event,
Okay.
when they either hear about it or when they see it, and they begin to feel as if that traumatic event happened to themselves or someone very close to them. Now, I don't know George Floyd. Many of us don't know George Floyd, but because we've seen him on television and it play out over and over and over, we feel like he's our cousin, that he could have been at our family reunion.
Right.
And so because we're empathizing with the horrific murder that we saw, we empathize it. It comes out of the responsibility of wanting to help, of wanting to do something. And if we don't have the correct or proper coping skills and coping strategies, if we have more risk factors than we do protective factors, if we have mental health issues that are diagnosed or undiagnosed that we may or may not be aware of, all those things play a factor into vicarious trauma.
Okay.
And so it's pretty much like we are experiencing the trauma. And again, this is not to minimize what George Floyd personally went through when he was murdered, but we feel that sense of responsibility as if we vicariously are living that trauma through him.
Okay.
And I think many people, as we walk around, we feel bad. We feel like we're grieving.
Mm-hmm.
And the reality is we are.
Right.
We are. I think what it really comes to mind is we have to understand and be able to admit and have those conversations when we are not okay.
Okay.
You know, oftentimes as we're walking throughout the day and we're having conversations throughout the day and someone calls you and says, "Hey, Dr. Walker, how you doing?" Our instinct is to say fine. Our
Right.
instinct is to say good.
Mm-hmm.
But is that really the reality? And I'll just be transparent, even when, Dr. Walker and I first got on this call to do the podcast, he said, "Hey, how are you doing?" And my response was, honestly, it's been a challenging and hard week, because it has been.
Uh-huh.
It has been. And so, I think one of the first steps as a culture, as anyone, is we got to be able to admit when we're not okay. It's okay to not be okay, but at the
Mm-hmm.
same point, it's okay to be okay. You may be okay, and that's great. But if you're not okay, it's okay to say you're not okay and to say how you're feeling. But I think oftentimes, we don't even know how to appropriately address how we are feeling. And I think that's really got to be a start of the conversation. And so whether you're able to have those conversations with close friends, whether it's family members or professional, we've got to start having those conversations.
You just said something, and something went off in my head. What you're telling us is that it's important to acknowledge what we are feeling and what we are going through. But then when you were saying to us what you told me when we logged on, you said this has been a challenging week. But you also said it, and this is how I'm interpreting what you said just now, is you're also saying it in a positive way, because you could have said, my life is just terrible. It's rotten. And, nothing is going right in my life. But those words could be far more damaging in acknowledging it than what you said. My week has been challenging. So even though it's been a challenging week, I still see a lot of positivity in that, and something to work with on a positive scale, instead of using a whole lot of negative words to describe what I'm going through. And I think that would make the situation far worse. Do you agree with that?
Oh my goodness, Dr. Walker, you just hit another point. And so, as they say, our power of life is in our tongue. And that
Right.
is absolutely indeed the case. The reality is we have between 60,000 and 80,000 thoughts per day.
Wow.
Did you hear me? 60,000 and 80,000 thoughts per day.
Mm-hmm.
80% of those are typically negative. Like, to me, that's like mind blowing. So you're talking about 60 to 80,000 thoughts per day, and 80% of those are typically negative thoughts. And so if we don't start doing things to rewire those thoughts,
Uh-huh.
we are going to be in trouble. So think about how that negative, if you are having all of that negativity,
Right.
how that plays into the mental illnesses that you could be having.
Okay.
It's not going to help at all. And so for me, it's about speaking my truth. It's about being honest. But again, how do you say it? How do you present it? Because you're absolutely right. I could have completely said it's been an absolutely crappy day and I feel horrible and life just sucks. And oh my goodness,
Right.
what is the world? Poor me, poor me.
Uh-huh.
And so, like you said, how do you say the things? And I think the first thing to do is, it's about, one, being aware that you're even having these negative thoughts.
Right.
Be aware of it. And this takes training. And it doesn't happen in, like, I'm gonna change this right now. Oh yeah, baby. No, it doesn't necessarily always happen like that, because it really is rewiring. It's kind of like if you were a computer whiz and you kind of went in and did all this coding into the system. You got to recode what's hardwired into your head.
Right.
And so, first you got to be aware of what thoughts you're having.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have to be able to, again, acknowledge them and then decide, what do I want to replace that with? How can I still be honest and truthful, but still get my point across? And I think, from a young age, when someone thinks something's not going well with you, what do they typically say? They say, what's wrong?
Right.
What's wrong? What's wrong? What's wrong? And so we grow up in a world thinking that something is wrong. And so wrong already has a negative connotation to it. And so if someone says something like, what's wrong? You're either going to lie and say, okay, all is well, or you're going to go into giving all the negative thing of what's wrong. And so I typically tell people, try not to even ask people anymore, what's wrong?
Mm-hmm.
How are you doing? How are you feeling? What challenges are you having? But to say what's wrong, you're already starting off with a negative connotation and asking for a negative response back. And so again, it starts very young. And I'm not saying that this is necessarily even how my parents did, but again, as you know better, you do better. And so, try not to even ask people what's wrong, because that already sets a negative connotation. But you can say, how are you feeling? What have you been up to? What are your thoughts? And we got to also learn to be able to express ourselves in a way where people are understanding what we're going through.
Absolutely right. We oftentimes are not thinking of how important our words are. And that's all of us. And that's what you're trying to
Yes.
get us to understand, that even when we ask someone, how they're doing and what's wrong. We have to say words correctly, so this way we get the better out of people,
Yes,
a better response, because the whole thing is to be better after you've dealt with things all day long.
yes.
Now, I want to move to, now we've talked about the trauma, the trauma from death, and how we deal with mental health when it comes to death, but we also are dealing with another crisis in America and around the world, which is the COVID-19
Yes.
crisis. So what would you share with us about that and the impact? And I also want to, I should say, the impact it's having on all of us, but then of course, the statistics are showing that African Americans are being affected far more than whites when it comes to the COVID-19. So I want you to speak to the mental health issues concerning that subject.
Yes, absolutely. So yes, COVID is upon us, and I know that things are starting to opening back up, and I feel like some people have lost their everlasting mind and feel like it has automatically disappeared because we open back up.
Right.
False, false, false.
Uh-huh.
COVID is still out there, and I think, you know, when we look at COVID and the impact that it has had on us, ultimately it's a lot of, honestly, grief that's surrounded by that. And of course, there's a whole grief cycle that I'll talk quickly about. But if you think about it, people have lost loved ones, of course,
Mm-hmm.
due
Mm-hmm.
to COVID. There's people who have lost jobs due to COVID.
Right.
We've lost a sense of normalcy. So again, one day we were just walking around doing our thing. Yeah, we heard a little bit about this COVID, and then bam, we're in isolation for what, 2-3 months, depending on where you're at. I even think about, I lost my hairdresser now. I got my hair done the other day, y'all. But but before that, I lost my hairdresser and my nail tech. And, I make a little bit of light of it. But the reality is there's a lot of things that we've lost. And
Mm-hmm.
so again, it goes back to people are grieving. Oftentimes I think when people hear the word grief, they're like, grief is only related to a death. You
Okay.
have kids who are no longer going to school. And so their whole friend circles have changed, or, that meal that they're used to getting at school is no longer there. And so there's, again, a lot of loss that has happened.
Right.
And we need to understand that, because there's an entire grief cycle that individuals go through. And so, typically it starts with denial. And I think if I kind of relate this to COVID, since that's more so the question, when we look at denial, many of us were thinking like, oh, it's happening over in China and, Wuhan, it's no big deal. It's not going to come to the US, And so we're in denial that it can't even come to the US. It can't come to North Carolina where I'm at. It can't come to Florida where Dr. Walker is. And so that was kind of the denial phase that many of us were in.
Mm-hmm.
And then we kind of switched to the anger phase. So the next stage is anger, where we're kind of like, you're going to make me get in isolation and I can't go anywhere, and you have us on lockdown and I can't go get my hair and nails done. And, my kids can't go to school anymore, and I lost my job, and, I can't go visit family members because of COVID and all the restrictions.
Right.
So then we go to this whole anger phase of it.
Okay.
Then we go to the depression stage of it, of like, okay, the reality is starting to seep in that my normal life isn't there. That routine that I used to have is no longer there. And so now I'm getting to the point where I'm sad. Maybe I'm on the verge of depression for some people. And I use the words interchangeably here because, you can be very sad without being depressed. And some
Okay.
people are saddened by it, but there's also a group of people who actually get depressed by it, because when individuals have been sitting in isolation, and we're calling it, social distancing. And I don't like that word, social distancing, because you don't have to not be social.
Okay.
It's definitely physical distancing, where you're
Mm-hmm.
not maybe be in the same room as individuals. But for some people, they literally took it as social distancing means I'm cutting the world off. And so now they're in isolation, which again, it's going to lead to increased mental health issues that we're going to begin to see more and more and more.
Mm-hmm.
And then after we go through the depression stage, we're moving through the bargaining stage of, we're saying things such as, this is where we kind of say, oh, Lord, if you just do this one time, Lord,
Uh-huh.
Jesus, I never do it again. I'll never
Right.
do it again. We've all been there where we try to bargain with God, or, for our governors who are, putting some of these stipulations in place, we get mad at them, or bargain with them like, okay, so if I stay home for these 2 weeks,
Mm-hmm.
then does that mean we're going to open back up? So then you try this whole bargaining thing that you're going on in your head. And then of
Right.
course, the last stage of the grief cycles is acceptance. And acceptance doesn't mean that you necessarily 100% agree with it, that you're 100% okay with it. It means
Mhm.
that you're just understanding of what's going on and what's happening. And so people really need to understand the grief cycle, because many of us are grieving. Again, it doesn't necessarily have to be a death that causes us to grieve. Grief is things that we have lost, our
Right, right.
normal. And for me personally, from going into an office to working from home all day, where I'm home by myself all day, the interactions I have may be a meeting, if they decide to have some normal conversation instead of work stuff. And so
Mhm.
for me, I had to really focus on a routine. And
Okay.
so I still have to get up. I still I put my makeup face on. I still put my clothes on. Now I might have yoga pants on the bottom, but
Sure.
I'm dressed up at the top. And
Okay.
when I go to meetings, people are like, Kennette, why are you so dressed up at 7 o'clock in the morning? And I was like, it's important to keep a routine, because some people were trying to work out of their bed as soon as they rolled over, hair messed up, haven't even brushed their teeth, talking to
Wow.
somebody.
Uh-huh.
But those are the things that lead to depression. And then I had to be conscious about shutting things down. I get up at 3:30, and so I'm not trying to, just because I'm home, I'm not going to meet with you to 4:30 and 5:30. 3:30, I'm shutting it down. And
Gotcha.
then what I would do is I would go for a walk, because typically with this whole COVID situation, many of us, if we had that travel time where we're
Mhm.
able to decompress and able to compartmentalize, and
Okay.
whether we were going home on the subway or the tube, or driving home, or we were rushing from work to take our kids to different activities,
Mhm.
those things are no longer there. And so it's been important to be able to set those things in place of what's going to separate my day from work at home to just being at home. And so for me, it was part of that routine was, when you get off work, you go for a walk. Or if you can't go for a walk because it's raining, you get in the garage and you do some type of physical activity so that you can release those endorphins that help you out, and so that you won't get sad, and you reduce the likelihood of being depressed.
So now that we are, I'm not quite sure of how long we'll be having to deal with, COVID-19. But as we, draw our conversation to a close, I want you to I want you to give us some steps, some simple, basic mental health steps that we could all do. That's not, too challenging. That's to help us to get into a better mental state. So anything that you can suggest for us?
Yes, I'm going to share a few things, if
Oh,
that's okay.
take your time.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So I think the first thing, I'm going to talk about our responsibility to others around us.
Okay.
So whether that's these virtual conversations that are happening, or whether you're starting to see people face to face, and
Hmm.
I like to call it the L cube model, L cube. And so one, it's important that when we're having conversations with other people, that we look, listen, and link. And so one, what you're looking for is, again, as my fiance says, I'm nosy, but I like to say I'm observant. But you're looking at people to see if you notice something that's different about them. And so
Hmm.
I don't want y'all to go start staring folks down like, ooh, I'm trying to see what's different. But, honestly, it's really looking, because sometimes what we say and how we act are completely two different things, and they're not congruent. So
Okay.
if I'm looking sad and depressed, but I say, oh, absolutely, I'm blessed and highly favored, I'm great, it's amazing, but I'm looking all disheveled, you're probably going to want to pause and be like, like, are you really, like, how are you really doing?
Hmm. Hmm.
And so, I call it, you need to first be able to look. And then the next thing is you need to be able to listen. Like, you can't be afraid to ask those questions of not what's wrong, but how are you doing? How are you feeling today?
Okay.
And hopefully you get a nice response back, or an honest and truthful response back. And then the third thing is be able to link, because there's going to be those individuals who are not doing okay. They're
Okay.
either pretending to be okay. And it's our responsibility to be able to say, you know what, my brother and my sister, I'm going to link you to some resources. And that's not necessarily meaning that you have to pay for them to go to counseling, but maybe a few resources, whether it's a sliding fee scale, whether it's a no cost, whether it's just sending them to a URL website where they can go look and check something out. And so again, I call it the L cube model.
Okay.
Um, the next thing I would share with individuals is, everybody, not everyone, but many people are in that place where, again, either they're grieving, sometimes you don't even know what's wrong. Like, have you ever talked to someone, including myself, where you feel like, I don't feel quite right, you can't quite name it. And
Hmm.
so I often tell people to think about the HALT method, HALT, HALT. And when you're starting to feel that way, ask yourself this question: are you hungry? Because sometimes you're just hangry. If you're like me, you love to eat. And so again, eating is super important for our bodies,
Okay.
and so important that we're eating. And then the next thing you want to say is, no, am I angry? You know, you
Okay.
may be absolutely angry about George Floyd and other things that are happening. And so maybe you're feeling like you're in a funk because you're angry. But again, you have to be open and honest with yourself to admit, to be aware and acknowledge that, yes, I'm angry, and I'm angry because of X, Y, and Z, and put a name on it. Whatever you're angry about, put a name on it, but you need to be honest with yourself to be able to do that.
Hmm.
Then you know, the L in halt is, you know, are you lonely? Because again, you know, some of us could be lonely, especially if, you know, we're used to being super active and, you know, being engaging with other people, and now maybe that has stopped, or you haven't found ways to incorporate it into whatever this new normal is. Maybe it's that you're lonely. I know I was talking to a young lady, and she went to, well, not young lady, but she went to go visit her daughter in Canada, and she had to quarantine for 14 days before she could even go see her daughter, and that
Okay.
was a restriction. And
Hmm.
so she was telling me, like, I'm not feeling like myself. And so when we were talking about this, you know, she says, I'm lonely. You know, I've been in quarantine, I'm almost, you know, at that point it might have been like 10 days, but she was like, you know, I haven't had any human interaction besides what's on this computer. And
Right.
so she was able to identify that she was lonely.
Okay.
And I think the last thing is, you know, are you tired? The T is, are you tired? You know, sleep is important, as much as we maybe minimize it or we don't put a lot of value on sleep. But, you know, are you tired and you just need, you know, to take a nap? And it doesn't have to also be physically tired. Maybe you're just mentally tired. Like, you know, when you look back at, you know, all the unarmed Black men and women that are being killed, you
Hmm.
might just be tired.
Right. Right.
And so again, it's important that we kind of look at that HALT method. So now we have the L cubed method, we have the HALT method, and then the last few things I will just share are just simple tips
Okay.
that we can try and do as far as mental health. And one thing that, you know, I really believe in, I just call it hit the reset button. Find the reset button, hit the reset button. Okay, it's
Right.
not a physical button, but, you know, for me, it's hitting that reset button of, you know, sometimes it's just a matter of resetting when things are not, you know, going right. You're starting to feel anxious, you're starting to feel stress. And when you need to hit that reset button, it could be something as simple as going to the bathroom or going into your office or wherever you're at and doing 5 to 10 jumping jacks.
Okay.
Because when you start doing those jumping jacks or any type of physical activity, you're releasing endorphins. And these are the same endorphins that you would typically get from taking an antidepressant if you're on depression, you know, you have depression.
Okay.
And so that's why physical activity is so important. So sometimes if I need a quick reset, I might just start doing, you know, 5 to 10 jumping jacks. You know, other things that people can do is, you know, it sounds so simple, but breathing is super duper totally important. Of course, we breathe every day, but most of us have very shallow breathing. We
Okay.
breathe like our chest up, and so it ends up kind of looking like that in a sense. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but you know, sometimes it's really about taking that deep cleansing breath. And I mean, I'm talking about like pulling down from your toes and pulling it all the way up and you know, holding and then breathing out.
Hmm.
And those are the times that you feel so much better. And if you honestly take time to do deep breathing, you automatically feel better. Other things that you can do is I like to do muscle relaxation. Oftentimes we walk around so tense. Even if you go to bed at night, some of us are laying in bed and we're super tense. And if you're aware of it, everything's about being really aware and mindful and present and in the moment. But if
Okay.
you're present and in that moment, you'll realize, like, even right then when I said it, I was like, oh, let me become aware of how my muscles are. And I was squeezing my shoulder blades. And so when I relaxed them, I was like, ooh, that's kind of sore. But you know, as you go throughout the day, you don't realize how often you are, you know, squeezing your muscles, even like your jawbone. Sometimes you're sitting there and you're clenching. Maybe you're in that meeting and you're mad as fire and you don't even realize it, but you're clenching your teeth. And then later on in the day, you're wondering why your jaws are so tired and so sore. It's
Hmm.
because you weren't practicing muscle relaxation. You were tense all day. And so it's about doing that body scan throughout the day of like, you know, how are my muscles? I need to, you know, relax. And, you know, if you're not quite sure if you're doing it or not, you know, start with your toes or start at a particular point in your body and you squeeze as tight as you can and
Wow.
then you release. And
Uh-huh.
you squeeze as tight as you can and you release. And then sometimes, you know, when I'm laying in bed, I'm like, oh, I think I'm relaxed. I'm in bed now. I'm about to go to bed. And then I was like, okay, I'm going to practice muscle relaxation. And then I realized how tense my shoulders are. And then when I take that deep breath and I kind of release them, I automatically feel, it just feels completely different. And so, you know, mindfulness is, you know, the practice of being present and being in the moment. So whether that's, you know, praying for you, whether that's meditating for you, whether that's going for a walk in nature sure if that's something that you like doing, whether it's just sitting in that. We have to be present and in the moment, because oftentimes, again, we're having those 60 to 80,000 thoughts a day. And so when we should be thinking about, I'm on this podcast with Dr. Walker, I might start thinking about, oh, and what am I going to eat for dinner afterwards? That's not being present. That's not being in the moment. And so think about how many times you're shortchanging yourself or you're shortchanging other people because you're truly not present and in the moment. And even if you think about the young boys who got stuck in the cave, what they contributed to getting out of that cave was practicing mindfulness. They weren't, thinking about the future, because that's a whole nother conversation where when we start jumping from where you are to what could happen, the uncertainties and the unknown, that's when the fear and anxiety starts to come in. And, fear and anxiety, just real quick, fear and anxiety are normal, and it's okay for us to have fear and anxiety, because fear and anxiety causes us to take action. So if we relate it back to COVID, the fear that I have is going to cause me to put my mask on when I go out in public right now. It's going to cause me to put my gloves on. It's going to cause me to be a little bit more cautious about things. So fear allows us to take action. But it's when we start to make up a story about what's going to happen, of like, oh, I saw on TV that someone passed from COVID, I'm going to die from COVID. And you haven't even been anywhere, and so we start making these assumptions. And so that's where the fear and anxiety comes in at. And so if you're able to, maybe practice the L cube, the HALT method, and some of those other tips that I shared with you, that can hopefully kind of help decrease some of those stress and anxieties and reduce the mental health altogether.
Absolutely. Dr. K, I mean, this conversation was outstanding. And I really appreciate you for being on today, because we are in a time when mental health is really, if it's not the number one priority, it has to be up near the top. We can't overlook our mental health. We cannot, overlook the importance of having good professional care in this time. And, again, that vicarious trauma. I know many, because I saw so many people watching them on TV in tears. The other day, General Colin Powell, great man, 5-star general. When he was in the White House, he was the Joint Chiefs of Staff. So you've seen it all. You've seen war, you've seen death. But he was on the other day, and they were talking about the things that's going on in the administration, and how there's this lack of sentiment and feelings for the loss of others. And he just came to emotions, not necessarily tears, but he held it in. But you could tell that he was going through. And so many people are going through mental health issues, and you came on today helping us to get better. So I really, truly appreciate you. And you are someone who has gone beyond the culture. I want to thank you for being with us today. Now, if I want you to share any information, social media information, and even the name of that upcoming book, so this way my audience could know more, have your contact information.
Yes, absolutely. And I want to share one more thing, because you kind of brought one more thing to mind. As individuals, these are kind of like my closing words before I give about how to find me, is, we need to really start treating mental illness as a physical ailment. They're the same. They're the same. If you had a broken leg or a broken arm, you would go to the doctor. If someone says, "Oh, you'll be all right, you'll get better," no, you are going to go to the doctor because your arm is broken, hurt. Just because you can't see a mental health issue doesn't mean you don't go get help for it. And so again, if we can just start taking mental health as serious as we do our physical health, or start seeing it as physical health, I think we'll see more people start to get help and support and for that particular area. So those are my closing words for that. As far as how to get in contact with me, I would say, the book that I'm working on is You Need a Bible and a Couch. One of the books that I currently have out right now is called Rated Black, A Parent's Underground Guide to Dealing with Police. And so this is a book that I actually wrote. I released it in February 2019.
Okay.
I sat on it for about 2 years because I was a little bit nervous to put it out, because I was like, what are people going to think,
Right.
But again, I needed to write this book. This was kind of like my give back, my legacy that I can leave behind for parents to kind of talk to their children about dealing with police brutality. Because unfortunately, not only are we having the conversations about the birds and the bees, but we have to talk about being Black in America. And so that's what this particular book is about. And so, but I would love to stay in contact with people out there. You can find me on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook at Dr. Kennette Thigpen. That's Dr. Kennette Thigpen, Kennette. Thigpen is Thigpen. So I look forward to connecting with all of you. And Dr. Walker, I just want to say to you, thank you for having me on. It has been an absolute pleasure. And keep doing what you're doing.
Thank you, Dr. K. And I appreciate those kind words. And we're just doing what God has called us to do. So thank you for joining us today. Really appreciate you.
Absolutely. Take care.
All right, you take care.